quiet archive record. Tonight, we're stepping into a slow unfolding. Settle in, let the outside world dissolve, and gently descend into tonight's world. In November 1963, a motorcade moved through Dallas under bright Texas light, and in seconds, the 20th century seemed to split. Tonight, we follow the record by the clock. The planning of the trip, the published route, the turn into Dealey Plaza, the shots at 12:30 p.m., the rush to Parkland, and the evidence chain that formed while the nation was still trying to understand what it had just seen. We follow Lee Harvey Oswald through an afternoon of buses, streets, and interrogation rooms. Thence follow Jack Ruby into the police basement 2 days later. Finally, we examine the Warren Commission and the HSCA and separate what is established from what remains contested. This is the JFK Assassination story. Chapter 1. Dallas before the shots. The archive begins the way most disasters begin, with logistics. The Texas trip was not a secret operation. It was scheduled, announced, and built for visibility. In the fall of 1963, President John F. Kennedy and his advisors were already thinking about 1964. The Democratic Party was divided in places, and Texas was both an electoral prize and a political challenge. A presidential visit could signal unity and strength. Friday, November 22nd, 1963. The morning began in Fort Worth. Kennedy and Jacqueline Kennedy had spent the night at the Hotel Texas. That morning, Kennedy spoke at a breakfast hosted by the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce. The speech was ordinary politics for that era. Civic confidence, economic optimism, and Cold War language about resolve. Then the schedule moved. Shortly before 11 a.m., Air Force One departed Carswell Air Force Base for Dallas. At approximately 11:37 a.m., Air Force One landed at Dallas Love Field. Photographs and film show the arrival. The day is clear. The rope line is close. Kennedy and the First Lady greet people as if the country is stable, as if history cannot break on a street corner. The motorcade lineup is established. President John F. Kennedy in the rear seat of a 1961 Lincoln Continental limousine. Jacqueline Kennedy beside him. Governor John Connally of Texas in the jump seat ahead with his wife Nellie. Secret Service agents in the follow-up car and protective formation. Local officials and a press pool. The open-top limousine is now remembered as a symbol. In 1963, it was still common. The presidency had not yet fully entered the armored era. The route was published. This matters because it creates an uncomfortable fact. Anyone who wanted to place themselves along the route could do so. The crowd could choose its corners. The press could position cameras. The city could prepare for a parade. The motorcade left Love Field around 11:50 a.m. The intended destination was the Dallas Trade Mart for a luncheon. The famous geometry that would later be studied frame by frame was simply the street plan. The motorcade traveled through downtown. It turned right onto Houston Street. It made a tight left turn onto Elm Street. That left turn slowed the limousine. Elm Street ran alongside the Texas School Book Depository, a brick building used for storing and shipping textbooks. In the later myth, the depository becomes a character. On that day, it was a workplace. Cartons, order slips, freight elevators, and employees. One of those employees was Lee Harvey Oswald. We introduce him the way the record allows. Established background points. Born October 18th, 1939, in New Orleans. Enlisted in the US Marine Corps in 1956. Traveled to the Soviet Union in 1959 and lived there. Married Marina Prusakova. returned to the United States in 1962, lived in Texas in 1963, employed at the Texas School Book Depository by the fall of 1963. Oswald is a figure who attracts projection. Some people want him to be a pure ideologue, others a pure pawn. The record suggests a troubled, self-mythologizing man with political beliefs and a need to feel significant. There is also the Mexico City trip. In late September 1963, Oswald traveled to Mexico City and visited the Cuban and Soviet embassies. He sought a visa to travel to Cuba and then the Soviet Union. The trip is established. The meaning of certain intelligence claims tied to that trip is contested. This matters because it gives the story a foreign policy shadow. It provides hooks for theories involving Cuba, the Soviet Union, and intelligence agencies. Now, the morning of November 22nd, Oswald went to work. A key detail in the official story is a long paper package brought to the depository that morning. Co-workers described a long package. Oswald said it contained curtain rods. Whether it contained curtain rods or a disassembled rifle is contested, and it becomes one of the hinge points. The rifle connected to Oswald in the Warren Commission narrative is a 6.5 mm Mannlicher Carcano, purchased by mail order under the alias A. Heidel. The archive does not treat any of these facts as a spell. It treats them as pieces, because the case is full of statements like obvious and impossible, spoken before the pieces are weighed. So the archive sets a method. When you hear a claim, ask, is it established by physical evidence, contemporaneous records and corroboration? Or is it contested, built from inference, missing records, or imperfect memory? Now, the motorcade approaches the turn. At around 12:25 p.m., the cars are moving through downtown Dallas. At around 12:29 p.m., they are nearing Dealey Plaza. At 12:30 p.m., the shots, Chapter 2, Dealey Plaza. The archive begins this chapter with the space itself. Dealey Plaza is small enough to cross in a minute and large enough to contain decades of argument. To the left, the depository. Ahead, the underpass. To the right, the grassy slope and fence line. Above and behind, hard surfaces that reflect sound. Between them, the motorcade route, moving like a ribbon. At about 12:30 p.m., the limousine turned left onto Elm Street and moved away from the depository. Then, a sharp sound occurred. In many witness statements, the first sound is not recognized as gunfire. It is labeled as a backfire or firecracker. This is not stupidity. It is pattern recognition. A gunshot is not the only sharp sound a city can produce. Then a second sound. Then, for many, a third. Established anchors. Shots were fired at the motorcade in Dealey Plaza at about 12:30 p.m. Kennedy was struck. Connolly was struck. The most famous record of the seconds is the Zapruder film. Abraham Zapruder filmed the motorcade on 8mm film. The footage lasts about 26.6 seconds. Its frames have been numbered and studied as if they were scripture. The Warren Commission concluded 3 shots were fired from the 6th floor of the depository. That conclusion rests on a bundle of evidence. The rifle found on the 6th floor, cartridge cases, witness statements, ballistics comparisons, and reconstructed timing. The most disputed element is the second shot. To reconcile 3 shots with multiple wounds, the Warren Commission embraced the single bullet theory. It proposes that one bullet struck Kennedy, exited, and then struck Connolly, producing multiple wounds. This is contested. Supporters point to the seating positions and the inboard placement of Connolly. Critics point to the condition of the bullet recovered at Parkland, Commission Exhibit 399, and argue it appears too intact. The archive does not settle this by volume. It marks what is established. Kennedy was wounded. Connolly was wounded. A bullet labeled as Commission Exhibit 399 entered the evidence chain, and it marks what is contested. Whether one bullet accounts for the combined wounds said. Now, the headshot. The film shows a violent impact. Many viewers interpret Kennedy's visible movement as evidence of a shot from the front. That interpretation is contested. Bodies can react in complex ways. The car is moving, and film is not a full physics lab. In the immediate seconds, the Secret Service reacted. Agent Clint Hill ran from the follow-up car and climbed onto the limousine. In the crowd, people moved in different directions. Some ran toward the grassy knoll, some toward the depository. This split is not proof. It is a description of human response under confusion in an echoing space. The limousine accelerated toward Parkland Memorial Hospital. The arrival is established around 12:36 to 12:38 p.m. Doctors attempted resuscitation. A tracheotomy altered the throat wound. At 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, Kennedy was pronounced dead. Then the case became jurisdiction. Dallas authorities expected an autopsy in Dallas. Federal personnel insisted on transporting the body to Washington. A conflict occurred. This is an early rupture in procedural trust, not proof of conspiracy, but fertile ground for it. Air Force One returned to Love Field. Lyndon B. Johnson, the vice president, was moved for security. At about 2:38 p.m., Johnson was sworn in aboard Air Force One. At about 2:47 p.m., the plane departed Dallas. While the nation transitioned, Dallas began its hunt. Chapter 3. The immediate aftermath. The first hour after the shots is where the case takes its shape. Police moved into Dealey Plaza. Witnesses were questioned, reporters called newsrooms, and inside the Texas School Book Depository, the building itself became a suspect. Searches began. Established points. Police searched the depository soon after the shooting. A rifle was found on the 6th floor. Cartridge cases were found near the area described as the sniper's nest. The details of exactly who handled what and in what order become contested in some reconstructions because chain of custody is the skeleton of trust. A key narrative element is the lunchroom encounter. Officer Marion Baker, accompanied by Roy Truly, encountered Oswald in a second-floor lunchroom, according to the Warren Commission story. Baker did not arrest Oswald. Truly said he was an employee. Timing is contested. This is not a trivial argument. It is a hinge. A simple question sits behind it. Could Oswald have fired from the 6th floor and then reached the second-floor lunchroom in time? Some reconstructions say yes. Some say no. The archive does not pretend to resolve a stopwatch argument with a lullaby voice. It only notes that this is one of the places where the record invites competing models. Now, Oswald left the depository. That is established. The exact minute-by-minute path is reconstructed from witness accounts and later investigation. The general outline is that he traveled to his rooming house at 1026 North Beckley Avenue. Then the story intersects the second killing. At approximately 1:15 p.m., Officer J.D. Tippit was shot and killed in Oak Cliff. Established points. Tippit was killed. Oswald was later charged with Tippit's murder. Contested edges. Some witness identifications. The precise sequence and timing. The meaning of physical evidence in the Tippit case. The Tippit event matters because it changes the emotional reading of the suspect. A person accused of killing a president can feel abstract. A person accused of killing a police officer feels immediate. This accelerates public certainty. Now, the Texas Theater. Oswald entered the Texas Theater. Police converged. At about 1:50 p.m., Oswald was arrested after a struggle. Established points. He was arrested alive. There was a struggle. A pistol was present. Then, Dallas Police Headquarters. Oswald was interrogated. He denied killing anyone. He said he was a patsy. That public claim is established. The full content of interrogation is contested because there is no complete modern recording or transcript. This absence is structural. It means later generations cannot evaluate tone, pressure, confusion, or clarity. So they imagine. Now the body and the autopsy. Kennedy's autopsy was performed at Bethesda Naval Hospital on the night of November 22nd. That is established. The quality and handling of autopsy materials are contested in later debates. Parkland doctors had initial observations. Bethesda produced the official conclusions. The throat wound was altered by the tracheotomy. This created a record that was never clean. Not because someone must have intended it, because emergency medicine prioritizes life, not evidence. But the consequence is the same. Later arguments have room. Chapter 4. Oswald, Ruby, and the case. Tightening. If Oswald had lived, the story would have had a courtroom. It would have had cross-examination. It would have had a defense. Instead, the story had a basement. Sunday, November 24th, 1963. Oswald was being transferred from Dallas Police Headquarters to the county jail. Cameras were present. Reporters were present. The basement became a stage. At about 11:21 a.m., Jack Ruby stepped forward and shot Oswald. Established points. Ruby shot Oswald. The shooting was broadcast live on television. Oswald died later that day. Ruby's identity is part of the mystery. He was a Dallas nightclub operator. He was known around the police environment. He had access that seems impossible in hindsight. Some of that access may have been casual familiarity. Some may have been security failure. Some people believe it was more than that. Ruby said his motive was emotional, that he wanted to spare Jacqueline Kennedy the pain of a trial. That explanation is contested in the public mind. But motive is not the only question. The structural effect is not contested. Oswald died. So the case would be decided in paper, not in court. And paper is easier to doubt. Now, what did Ruby's act do to the national psyche? It created a shape that looked like cleanup. Whether it was cleanup is contested, but the shape was enough to become part of the case itself. Ruby was arrested. He was tried. He was convicted. He later died in 1967. And in that gap between act and explanation, 1,000 theories found oxygen. Chapter 5. The investigations and the evidence. After an assassination, a nation needs closure, not only for justice, for stability, for foreign policy, for the nervous system of government. President Lyndon B. Johnson established the Warren Commission. Chief Justice Earl Warren chaired it. The commission reported in 1964. Established conclusions. The Warren Commission concluded Oswald acted alone. The Warren Commission concluded Ruby acted alone. The Warren Commission found no conspiracy it could identify. The commission relied on several categories of evidence: ballistics and firearm evidence, witness statements, films and photographs, medical evidence, Oswald's background and movements. The medical evidence becomes one of the most contested domains. Parkland doctors described a throat wound. Bethesda performed the autopsy. The official conclusion was that shots came from behind. Contested points include the handling of the autopsy, the photographs and X-rays and chain of custody. This is one of the reasons the case never feels like an ordinary solved crime. The evidence does not live in one place. It lives in 2 medical environments and 100 memories. Now, the 1970s, Vietnam, Watergate, revelations about intelligence operations, a crisis of trust. In this environment, Congress revisited the assassination. The House Select Committee on Assassinations, the HSCA, issued its report in 1979. Its headline conclusion was that Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy. A key pillar was acoustic analysis of a police dictabelt recording. That acoustic evidence is contested. Later reviews challenged its timing and interpretation, so the HSCA becomes both validation and warning. Validation that the case had unresolved edges. Warning that technical evidence can be overclaimed. Now, declassification. The JFK Records Act of 1992 led to large releases of assassination-related records. Some records remained withheld or redacted. The meaning of withholding is contested. Sometimes it protects sources and methods. Sometimes it protects privacy. Sometimes it protects bureaucratic embarrassment. Sometimes it hides wrongdoing. The archive refuses a single motive. It only notes that withholding keeps the file alive. Chapter 6. Conspiracies, counter-arguments, and what remains. The JFK case persists because it sits at an intersection that is rare. It is filmed, but not fully. It is documented, but not cleanly. It is investigated, but not decisively for everyone. The accused is killed before trial, so the case becomes a mirror. If you distrust institutions, you see cover-up. If you distrust the public, you see myth-making. If you distrust history, you see a permanent open file. The major theory, families repeat. A second shooter on the grassy knoll. Organized crime. Anti-Castro exiles. Cuba. The Soviet Union. Intelligence agencies. Each family has the same structural challenge. Motive is not proof. Proximity is not proof. A gap is not automatically a secret. To move from suspicion to conclusion, a theory needs operational evidence, documents, communications, money, verified participants, a chain that does not depend on one storyteller. Some researchers believe such chains exist. Others believe the case is best explained by a lone gunman and institutional pressure to close the file. The archive does not demand a single belief. It demands category discipline, established, contested, theory. Because when categories collapse, everything becomes equally true. And that is not investigation. That is trance. So we end the way a quiet archive ends, with a low voice, with the facts we can hold, with the contested points labelled honestly, and with the understanding that no theory can restore what was taken. The immediate aftermath. Now we slow down and walk the next hours with the blunt instruments the archive trusts. Names, places, and times. Dealey Plaza, immediately after the shots. Police officers and bystanders ran toward where they believed the shots came from. Some moved toward the depository. Some moved toward the knoll. Some moved toward the underpass. This split is one reason the witness record is messy without anyone lying. The depository search. Officers entered the Texas School Book Depository. They moved floor by floor. A rifle was later found on the 6th floor. The Warren Commission treated this as a key physical anchor. Critics often focus on chain of custody details. Who touched it, who moved it, and what was photographed when. The archive marks the categories. Established, a rifle was found and entered evidence. contested certain handling details and what they imply. Now, the manhunt. A suspect description was broadcast. In chaotic events, early descriptions can be both necessary and dangerous. They are necessary because police need direction. They are dangerous because they can produce a feedback loop. A description goes out. Witnesses interpret people through it. Reports reinforce it. This does not prove the wrong man was caught. It explains why early certainty is not the same as later proof. Oswald leaving the building. The official narrative places Oswald leaving the depository shortly after the shooting. He is then linked to the rooming house at 1026 North Beckley. Then the Tippett killing. Then the Texas Theatre. If you want the full story, you must follow the chain in detail, because most conspiracy arguments hinge on one of two claims. Oswald could not be in the required place at the required time. Oswald could be, but someone else still had to be involved. So we walk the most cited pieces. The lunchroom encounter. In the Warren Commission account, Officer Marion Baker rushed into the depository with Roy Truly. They encountered Oswald in a second-floor lunchroom area. Baker did not arrest him. Truly vouched he was an employee. Timing is the contested part. Some reconstructions argue Oswald could have descended quickly enough. Others argue the time is too tight. This is one of those disputes that can swallow a person for a decade because it feels like a solvable math problem. But it is not only math. It is the quality of witness memory, the exact path through stairs, the confusion of the moment, and the uncertainty of the clock. Now, Parkland versus Bethesda. Parkland doctors saw the wounds under emergency conditions. Bethesda performed the autopsy under institutional conditions. The throat wound was altered by the tracheotomy. The head wound is described in multiple ways. This is why medical debate persists, not because doctors are fools, because the record was born under pressure. The body left Dallas. A dispute occurred over jurisdiction. This is important because even if no conspiracy exists, procedural conflict can degrade later certainty. If a case needs to be trusted by the public, it needs to be clean. The JFK case is not clean. Now, the arrest, the Texas Theatre. At about 1:50 p.m., Oswald was arrested. He was alive. He could have been tried. He could have been cross-examined. That possibility is one of the reasons the case remains radioactive, because 2 days later, that possibility died. Now we move to that Sunday. Oswald, Ruby, and the case. Tightening, Jack Ruby, nightclub operator, familiar in police circles, able to step into a police basement and fire a gun. That act is established. The meaning is contested. Some believe Ruby was a lone emotional actor. Some believe Ruby was a link in a chain. Many people do not even need to choose. The image of the accused being killed on live television is enough to create a permanent suspicion. The archive calls this the shape problem. Even if the simplest story is true, the shape of the event looks like a cover-up, and people are often moved by shape more than by footnotes. Ruby was arrested. Ruby was tried. Ruby was convicted. Ruby later died in 1967. Those are established. Now the government had a problem. A president was dead. The accused was dead. The world was watching. The Cold War was active. Rumors were already spreading. The government needed a conclusion, not to satisfy curiosity, to prevent instability. So the Warren Commission, the investigations and the evidence. The Warren Commission was created by President Lyndon B. Johnson. Chief Justice Earl Warren chaired it. It included figures such as Senator Richard Russell, Senator John Sherman Cooper, Representative Hale Boggs, Representative Gerald Ford, and former CIA Director Alan Dulles. This list matters because it feeds later suspicion. When a commission includes insiders, critics assume protection. When a commission includes outsiders, critics assume ignorance. This is the trap of public trust after trauma. The Warren Commission report was delivered in 1964. Its core conclusion was that Oswald acted alone, and that Ruby acted alone. The Warren Commission relied on the three-shot framework and the single bullet theory. This is where the debate becomes technical. The rifle. The Mannlicher Carcano is a bolt-action rifle. It requires cycling the bolt between shots. The Commission cited tests indicating a shooter could fire multiple shots within the relevant time window. Critics argue that test conditions are not assassination conditions. The archive again marks this as contested, not because it is a fantasy, but because the public does not agree on what the tests prove. Ballistics. The connection between bullets and weapon is a central claim. The condition of Commission Exhibit 399 is a central controversy. The archive notes that even among people who accept the lone gunman conclusion, many admit CE 3999 is a psychologically difficult exhibit. It looks too clean, but looks are not physics. So the debate continues. Medical evidence. The autopsy at Bethesda produced official conclusions that shots came from behind. Parkland doctors had initial observations. The tracheotomy altered the throat wound. Photographs and X-rays exist. Contested points include interpretation, completeness, and chain of custody. Oswald's background. Oswald defected to the Soviet Union. Oswald returned. Oswald was known to government files. This creates a suspicion loop. If he was known, why was he near the president? There are many possible answers. Bureaucratic fragmentation, incomplete threat assessment, or something darker. The archive refuses to pick one without proof. Now, the 1970s. The United States was changed by Vietnam and Watergate. The public learned about covert operations. Trust eroded. In this environment, Congress created the House Select Committee on Assassinations. The HSCA reported in 1979. Its headline was that Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy. A key pillar was acoustic evidence, a police dictabelt recording. Later reviews challenged that acoustic interpretation, so the acoustic evidence is contested. This is why the HSCA is both a marker and a warning. Marker. The case had unresolved edges. Warning. Technical evidence can be overclaimed. Now, the Assassination Records Review Board and declassification. The JFK Records Act of 1992 created a framework for releasing records. Large numbers of documents were released over decades. Some remained withheld or redacted. The meaning of withholding is contested. Sometimes it protects sources and methods. Sometimes it protects privacy. Sometimes it protects embarrassment. Sometimes it hides wrongdoing. The archive refuses to treat withholding as automatic proof, but it also refuses to pretend withholding has no effect. It keeps the file alive. Now, the conspiracies. Conspiracies, counter-arguments, and what remains. The major theory, families repeat because they satisfy human needs. Need 1, motive that feels proportional. Need 2, capability. Need 3, an explanation for gaps. Second shooter theories. Many witness accounts mention the knoll. Some people ran there. Some people believed the sound came from there. The Zapruder film is interpreted by some as frontal. But physical linkage is where the debate lives. A theory becomes stronger when it ties to physical evidence. A theory becomes weaker when it relies only on perception. Organized crime theories. They are fueled by the Kennedy administration's pressure on organized crime and by Ruby's environment. They often rely on later claims and narratives. Operational documentation is the contested gap. Anti-Castro exile and Cuba theories. They are fueled by the Bay of Pigs aftermath and by Oswald's visible pro-Castro activity. Mexico City provides hooks, but hooks are not ropes. Intelligence involvement theories. They are fueled by secrecy and by Oswald being known to files. They are strengthened by direct documentation. They are weakened by inference without proof. Foreign government theories. They are fueled by Cold War plausibility. They are constrained by risk calculus. The archive does not demand a single belief. It demands discipline. If a claim is established, call it established. If it is contested, label it. If it is theory, call it theory. Because in the JFK case, the most common failure is category collapse. People treat contested points as established, or treat established points as optional. The archive ends with the baseline. A man was killed, a country changed, and the search for explanation became part of the country's identity. Dallas by the clock. A project like this is always tempted to start with the shot, because the shot is the hinge. But the archive insists on the hours before the hinge, because those hours explain why the day looks the way it does in the record. The trip was built for images. That is the point of a motorcade. The open car, the waving, the published route. These were not accidents. They were the public face of American politics in 1963. And in that public face, there were small choices that later look enormous. The limousine was open. The route required slow turns. The crowds were close. The Secret Service was operating under the norms of an earlier era. And the city itself was a stage. Dallas in 1963 was not only a place, it was a political climate. There had been hostility toward Kennedy in Texas politics. There were right-wing tensions. There were posters and rhetoric. There were people who hated his policies and his image. The archive does not use that to imply the crowd was violent. It uses it to describe why, later, people found it easy to believe that Dallas could hold an assassination. Now, Dealey Plaza in the record. Most retellings focus on two sites, the depository and the grassy knoll. To follow the official narrative, you follow the depository. To follow the most common alternative narratives, you follow the knoll. The archive follows both, but it refuses to merge them into certainty without proof. The Warren Commission built its case around the 6th floor. The rough logic is, the motorcade slowed in the turn. The line of sight from the 6th floor window existed. The rifle was found on the 6th floor. Cartridge cases were found. A man matching Oswald was seen and later linked. The timeline for a lone shooter could be made to work. The strongest arguments for a lone shooter are usually structural. They say, if you accept the 6th floor and the rifle, you do not need a second shooter to explain the tragedy. The strongest arguments against it are often structural too. They say, the timing, the wounds, and the witness direction reports do not sit comfortably inside 3 shots from behind. This is why the case becomes a permanent argument. It is a battle of models. Dealey Plaza, the first seconds. At about 12:30 p.m., shots were fired. That is established. But the first seconds are not only about bullets, they are about interpretation. People in the crowd did not know the first sound was a gunshot. Many labeled it as a backfire or firecracker. Only after the sequence continued did the crowd begin to converge on the truth. That label delay creates lasting confusion. It means that two witnesses can remember direction differently because they oriented at different moments. The archive also notes the physical space. Sound can reflect off the underpass. It can reflect off concrete. A sharp report can seem to come from ahead when it comes from behind. Again, not an excuse. A reason for mess. Now, the medical record. Parkland Memorial Hospital is not an evidence lab. It is an emergency room. Doctors attempted resuscitation. A tracheotomy was performed. The throat wound was altered. The focus was life. That is why the later debate about the throat wound is bitter. It involves competing priorities. Parkland doctors gave early descriptions. Bethesda performed the autopsy. Those two records do not perfectly align. Some of that mismatch is procedural. Some may be interpretive. Some is contested. And because the record is not clean, people infer motives. The archive cannot forbid inference. It can only label it, the body and jurisdiction. After Kennedy was pronounced dead at 1:00 p.m., there was conflict over where the autopsy would be done. Dallas officials expected it to occur locally. Federal personnel insisted on transporting the body. This conflict is documented. It is also one of the first points where critics say the evidence chain was compromised. The archive treats this as a procedural fact with consequences. If a case needs to be trusted, the handling must be clean. Here, the handling was not clean. It may have been for reasons of security and urgency, but the effect is the same. Later, suspicion has a place to stand. The parallel timeline, Oswald. To understand why Oswald became the center of the case so quickly, you have to understand that the official story did not require a deep motive. It required a physical chain, a person present, a weapon, a location, a departure, a capture. Oswald fit the chain. He worked in the building. He left. A rifle was found. Witnesses placed a man. Then the afternoon events tightened the narrative. The Tippit killing, the Texas theater arrest. Whether you accept those as proof or as contamination depends on your model. But they undeniably shaped the public mind. A suspect who is also accused of killing a police officer is easier to imagine as the assassin. The archive calls this the moral acceleration effect. Now, the interrogation gap. Oswald was interrogated for hours, but the record is incomplete by modern standards. There is no full recording, no full transcript. There are notes. There are recollections. There are fragments. This absence is one of the largest single contributors to lasting doubt, because a trial is the environment where a story becomes tested. The JFK case did not get that. It got a dead suspect, Ruby. When Jack Ruby shot Oswald on November 24th, the public watched an accused man die live. That image does two things. It convinces some people that there must be a conspiracy, and it convinces others that chaos is enough to explain the horror. Either way, the image becomes part of the evidence, even though it is not. It becomes emotional proof. The archive insists on calling it what it is, a structural event. It removed the possibility of a normal trial. It ensured that official closure would come from commissions, and commissions are always less trusted than courtrooms. Now the archive adds more of what you asked for: facts, names, and dates, and the way those facts are used by competing narratives. The Warren Commission, what it was trying to do. The Warren Commission was not only trying to identify an assassin, it was trying to prevent a national crisis. The Cold War context mattered. If the United States publicly concluded that Cuba or the Soviet Union had killed the president, the pressure for retaliation could have been enormous. So the commission operated under a desire for stability. Whether that desire shaped conclusions is contested, but the desire existed. The commission's membership is often cited: Earl Warren, Richard Russell, John Sherman Cooper, Hale Boggs, Gerald Ford, Alan Dulles. This list matters because it feeds the trust debate. To some, these are wise officials. To others, these are insiders protecting insiders. The archive refuses to turn membership into proof. It notes how it functions in the public mind. HSCA, why it happened. The HSCA emerged in a different America, an America after Watergate, an America where the public had learned that institutions could hide misconduct. In that climate, the JFK case reopened. The HSCA's probable conspiracy conclusion is often summarized without its internal fragility. It relied heavily on acoustic evidence. That acoustic evidence was later challenged. So the HSCA becomes, again, both validation and warning. Validation: the case is not clean. Warning: committees can overclaim. Now, to hit the facts you requested, the archive lays out a timeline and a roster. Timeline anchors, commonly cited in the record: 11:37 a.m. Air Force One lands at Love Field. Chud 11:50 a.m. Motorcade departs Love Field. 12:30 p.m. Shots in Dealey Plaza. 12:36 to 12:38 p.m. Arrival at Parkland. 1 to about p.m. Kennedy pronounced dead. 1:15 p.m. Tippit killed. Approximate. 1:50 Heights p.m. Oswald arrested. 2:38 p.m. Johnson sworn in on Air Force One. 2:47 p.m. Air Force One departs Dallas. Nuvi 24. 11:21 a.m. Ruby shoots Oswald. These anchors matter because many theories require additional actions that must fit inside these windows. If a claim cannot fit the clock, it is not an explanation. It is a wish. Names that matter and why. John F. Kennedy and Jacqueline Kennedy are the center of the human loss. John Connolly is the second major wound in the car, and the reason the single bullet theory matters. Lyndon B. Johnson becomes president and must stabilize the country. Lee Harvey Oswald becomes the accused. Marina Oswald becomes a key personal witness to his life. Jack Ruby becomes the silencer. Earl Warren becomes the symbol of official closure. The HSCA becomes the symbol of reopened doubt. These names recur because the case is a loop. It returns to the same nodes. Conspiracy theory families, in slightly more detail. Second shooter, Chochaj Grassy Knoll. This family thrives on witness direction reports and the intuitive reading of the Zapruder film. It is strongest when it can anchor to physical evidence. It is weakest when it remains in the realm of perception. Organized crime. This family thrives on motive and on Ruby's perceived proximity to mob worlds. It is strongest when it can anchor to documents or verified operational links. It is weakest when it relies on later storytelling. Cuba. Anti-Castro. This family thrives on the Bay of Pigs and the intensity of the era. It is strongest when it can identify specific participants and communications. It is weakest when it relies on atmosphere, intelligence, involvement. This family thrives on secrecy and on Oswald being known to files. It is strongest when it can anchor to direct documentation. It is weakest when it treats secrecy as automatic guilt. Foreign government. This family thrives on Cold War fear. It is constrained by the risk calculus of retaliation. The archive keeps all of these in the contested category, not because they are silly, but because the public record does not settle them. And the archive ends this edition with the discipline it keeps returning to: established, contested theory. This discipline is the only way to keep the case from becoming a trance. more detail for the record, the hours that keep returning. To reach the full story, the archive expands the middle, because the middle is where theories either die or grow. The rifle, the window, and the limits of reconstruction. The Warren Commission narrative relies on a shooter with a bolt-action rifle. A bolt-action rifle can fire quickly in trained hands, but it requires a physical cycle. This matters because in many reconstructions, the timing between shots becomes part of the proof. If the shots are too close together, critics argue a bolt-action rifle could not do it. If the shots are spaced enough, the rifle remains plausible. The public often wants one number, one definitive interval. But the record is not a single stopwatch. It is a mixture of film frames, audio perceptions, and later modeling. So the archive keeps the claim in its proper category. Established. A rifle was found on the 6th floor and entered evidence. Contested. Whether all shot timing and accuracy demands sit comfortably within one shooter using that rifle. The single bullet as an architecture problem. A common mistake is to treat the single bullet theory as a strange flourish. It is not. It is the mechanism that allows a 3-shot model to account for the total wound picture. So if you reject it, you must provide an alternative architecture. More shots, different timing, different shooter positions, or a combination. Many people reject the single bullet theory because it feels counterintuitive. That feeling is real, but a feeling is not an alternative model. An alternative model must map wounds to shots and shots to time. This is where many popular narratives become soft. They show you a mystery and stop there. The archive keeps walking. Parkland, Bethesda, and why medical disagreement persists. Parkland doctors worked under emergency conditions. They were trying to keep Kennedy alive. They were not trying to preserve a courtroom wound. The tracheotomy changed the throat area. That alone creates later disagreement. Bethesda performed the autopsy under institutional conditions. It produced official conclusions. But later critics argued about completeness, about photographs, about X-rays, about chain of custody, and about what was described when. The archive does not resolve those controversies here. It labels them, contested, the handling and interpretation of certain medical evidence. This is one reason the case persists. When a murder case has a clean medical narrative, it becomes easier to accept. When it has competing medical narratives, the public turns into a jury without a judge. Oswald's life as fuel. Oswald was not only a man at a building, he had a political biography. He defected to the Soviet Union. He returned. He leafleted. He traveled to Mexico City. He attempted to reach Cuba and the Soviet Union. These facts do not prove he killed Kennedy, but they make him an ideal suspect for a Cold War story. This matters because it affects how people interpret motives. If Oswald is a lone ideologue, the case feels like a violent act of personal politics. If Oswald is a pawn, the case feels like a covert operation. The record contains enough strangeness to support both moods. That is why the archive keeps repeating discipline, why the interrogation gap is so damaging. In a normal case, the interrogation and trial create an adversarial record. The defense challenges the prosecution. The prosecution must show chain of custody. Witnesses are tested. Here, the accused died before trial, so there is no normal adversarial record. The interrogation itself is not preserved in full. This absence is not just a missing detail, it is a missing crucible. It means the public never watch the evidence get tested. Instead, the public watched commissions summarize, and summaries are not trials. Ruby as a second hinge, Ruby's act does not prove a conspiracy, but it guarantees suspicion, because to the human mind, it looks like a cleanup. Even if it was not, even if it was only chaos, the shape is enough to keep the case alive. That is why, even among people who believe Oswald acted alone, many still call Ruby the moment the file could no longer be trusted, not because of evidence, because of psychology. A longer list of recurring names, the ones that keep showing up: John F. Kennedy, Jacqueline Kennedy, John Connolly, Nellie Connolly, Lyndon B. Johnson, Lee Harvey Oswald, Marina Oswald, Jack Ruby, Earl Warren, Alan Dulles, Gerald Ford, the HSCA, the Assassination Records Review Board. When a new documentary claims to have solved the case, listen for which of these names it leans on. Often, it is not adding evidence. It is rearranging emphasis. A longer list of recurring objects: the zapruder film, the sixth floor window, the Mannlicher Carcano rifle, cartridge cases, Commission Exhibit 399, autopsy photographs and x-rays, the Dictabelt acoustic recording, declassified documents. These are the gravity wells. Arguments orbit them. If you want the full story, you must learn to ask what a claim does with these objects. Does it interpret them carefully, or does it use them as props? The archive's last guidance before it closes. In the JFK case, there are three kinds of statements. Statements that are true, statements that are unproven, statements that are theatrical. The danger is that theatrical statements sound like truth. They are confident. They are clean. They offer a villain. They offer an ending. Truth in this case is rarely clean. It is procedural. It is incomplete. It is shaped by emergencies. So the archive recommends one final habit. Whenever you feel certainty rise, ask, what is this certainty based on? A document, a chain of custody, a photograph, a testable claim, or only a story that feels proportional? That question does not solve the case, but it keeps you from being solved by it. The fuller story, the sections people argue over, the backyard photographs. One of the most repeated pieces of evidence in public debate is a set of photographs that appear to show Oswald in a backyard holding a rifle and newspapers. In the Warren Commission narrative, the photographs support a simple claim: Oswald possessed the rifle. In many alternative narratives, the photographs support an opposite claim: the state fabricated evidence. The archive labels this properly. Established. Photographs exist in the record and were treated as evidence. Contested. Interpretation, authenticity, and what can be proven from them. This is a classic example of how the JFK case works. The same object can be used as proof by opposing sides. When that happens, it usually means the object is powerful but not decisive. The paper trail and mail order purchasing. The rifle story includes a paper trail, purchase and shipment linked to the alias A. Heidel. In the official narrative, this paper trail ties Oswald to the weapon. In contested narratives, the paper trail is treated as vulnerable to fabrication or misattribution. The archive does not convert vulnerability into conclusion. It notes that vulnerable chains require extra care, and in this case, many people do not believe extra care was taken. That is why trust breaks. The witnesses and the burden of memory. A common failure in JFK debates is to treat witness statements as if they were produced by the same instrument. They were not. Some witnesses were close, some were far, some were looking at the car, some were looking at buildings. Some were turning only after the second sound. Some were running. Some were frozen. This produces sincere contradictions. The archive will say this plainly. If a case relies heavily on human perception under shock, it will never be clean. That does not mean it is unsolved. It means it will always have a contested fringe. The film record beyond Zapruder. The Zapruder film is famous because it is moving and because it captures the headshot. But it is not alone. Other films and photographs exist from the plaza. Some are used to argue for additional shooters. Some are used to argue for misinterpretation. The archive does not list them all here, but it marks the principle. A film can show movement. A film rarely shows motive. So when a documentary claims a film proves conspiracy, ask what step it uses to cross from motion to planning. That step is where many arguments fail. The autopsy, in the calmest possible words, the autopsy is central. The autopsy is also emotionally radioactive, because it is not only evidence, it is a human body. The record includes autopsy photographs and x-rays. The official conclusions said shots came from behind. Contested arguments focus on what was documented when, who had access, whether certain materials were handled cleanly, whether the environment imposed constraints. The archive refuses to turn these into a horror story. It keeps them in the category that matters, contested, and it notes why the contest persists. Because people do not only argue about wounds, they argue about institutional competence. And in the JFK case, incompetence feels too small. So people inflate it into intent. Sometimes that inflation is wrong, sometimes it is not. This uncertainty is the fuel, the intelligence context, and why it warps perception. By 1963, intelligence agencies were operating at high intensity. There were covert operations. There were surveillance programs. There were Cuba-focused actions. There were anti-Castro exile networks. There were informants. There were compartmentalized programs. When people learn these facts later, they reinterpret the assassination through them. This is natural. It is also dangerous, because it can turn context into causation. The archive calls this the background to foreground error. If covert operations exist, you can begin to see every event as covert. But some events are still human and messy. So the archive keeps the context, but refuses the leap without proof. The JFK Records Act and the hope of the withheld page. The JFK Records Act and later releases created a pattern. New documents emerge. People scan them for confession. Sometimes they find administrative detail. Sometimes they find new context. Sometimes they find frustrating redactions. The public has learned to read redaction as guilt. Sometimes that is fair. Sometimes it is not. But in this case, redaction is always gasoline. It keeps the argument alive. The most common, full story misunderstandings. The archive lists a few because they repeat. Misunderstanding 1. If the Warren Commission was wrong about one detail, it was wrong about everything. That is not a rule. A report can be correct in parts and flawed in parts. Misunderstanding 2. If the case is messy, it must be a conspiracy. Not necessarily. Mess is normal in traumatic events, but it can also be produced by cover-up. You need evidence to decide. Misunderstanding 3. If a theory has a strong motive, it is true. Motive is cheap. Evidence is expensive. Misunderstanding. If a theory feels proportional, it is true. Feeling is not proof. Misunderstanding 5. If a document is withheld, it must be explosive. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is mundane. The archive refuses to treat every withheld page as confession. It treats them as unknowns, a longer pass through the conspiracy family's second shooter. The second shooter family is often rooted in the claim that shots came from different directions. It is supported by some witness perceptions. It is supported by the intuition of the film. It is supported by the feeling that 3 shots cannot do enough. It is challenged by the difficulty of proving a second shooter physically, the lack of a recovered weapon tied cleanly to a second position, the complexity of sound reflection, organized crime. This family is rooted in motive and in the history of conflict between the Kennedy administration and organized crime. It is reinforced by Ruby's perceived connections. It is challenged by the difficulty of demonstrating an operational chain in documents, the tendency of later storytellers to fill gaps with certainty, anti-Castro exile in Cuba. This family is rooted in the Bay of Pigs and the intensity of early 1960s Cuba politics. It is reinforced by Oswald's pro-Castro leaflets and Mexico City. It is challenged by the difficulty of demonstrating a direct operational plan, the risk calculus of provoking US retaliation intelligence involvement. This family is rooted in secrecy and later revelations. It is reinforced by the fact that Oswald was known to government files. It is challenged by the difference between awareness and control, the need for direct documentation, foreign government. This family is rooted in Cold War fear. It is challenged by the catastrophic risk. The archive notes that some of these families can overlap. A theory can claim a second shooter and a cover-up. A theory can claim organized crime acting with intelligence tolerance. A theory can claim exile groups with indirect support. The more complex the theory, the more evidence it must supply. Complexity is not sophistication. Complexity is a debt. You pay it with proof. The quietest conclusion. The JFK case does not end the way people want. It ends with a timeline, a set of official conclusions, a set of contested points, and an enduring psychological wound. A president killed in daylight. An accused man killed on live television. A nation asked to accept closure without a trial. The archive does not call that acceptance irrational. It calls it difficult, and it calls the doubt a predictable human response to an event that broke the normal processes of truth. So the record stays open, not because the facts are all unknowable, but because the meaning of the gaps keeps shifting. And because, for many people, the case is not only about who fired the shots, it is about whether the public can ever fully trust the institutions that tell the story. The Dallas minutes that get quoted. The turn sequence and why it matters. People repeat the turn sequence because it feels like a design trap. Right onto Houston, left onto Elm. A slow car, a clear line. If you already believe conspiracy, the turn feels like proof. If you believe opportunity is enough, the turn feels like the explanation. The archive keeps it simple. The turns happened. The car slowed. That made the motorcade more vulnerable. Whether that vulnerability was exploited by one person or by more is the disputed question. The umbrella and the hunger for symbols. Certain images in Dealey Plaza recur like talismans. An umbrella, a badge, a man running, a puff, a fence. The archive notes a simple truth. In an event that becomes myth, ordinary objects become symbols. People assign meaning. Sometimes the meaning is correct. Sometimes it is only the mind trying to control chaos. This is why the JFK case produces endless micro-theories. Because the event was filmed, and film invites freeze-frame prophecy. The question of training and capability. Oswald's marine marksmanship record is often invoked. Some describe him as an excellent shooter. Some describe him as mediocre. The record suggests he had training, but was not an elite sniper. This is one reason the lone gunman conclusion is both plausible and contested. A trained person can do difficult things. A difficult thing is still difficult. The archive labels it properly. Contested. Whether the required shots were within Oswald's practical capability under real conditions. Why the case became a national argument instead of a local crime. A local crime can be processed locally. A presidential assassination cannot. It becomes foreign policy. It becomes legitimacy. It becomes continuity of government. So the case was pulled upward immediately. That upward pull has consequences. It can speed decisions. It can override local procedure. It can privilege closure. And even if everyone involved is acting in good faith, those structural forces can bend the record. This is why the archive is suspicious of any narrative that treats the investigation as if it happened in a calm, neutral world. It did not. It happened in a world trying to prevent panic. The last set of facts that matters for the viewer. If you remember nothing else, remember this structure. The event is real. The timeline is tight. The record is messy. The accused died. The closure came from commissions. That structure is why the argument persists. A tight timeline makes complex conspiracies harder, but not impossible. A messy record makes simple conclusions harder to trust, but not impossible. A dead accused makes doubt inevitable, and commissions make doubt permanent. That is the full story in a single architecture, not a slogan, a shape. The last push to the full record. The archive adds one more concentrated section, the questions that are actually answerable, and the ones that remain contested no matter how many times the story is retold. Questions that are answerable. Question: did Kennedy die in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963? Answer: yes, established. Question: did shots occur in Dealey Plaza at about 12:30 p.m? Answer: yes, established. Question: was Oswald arrested and charged? Answer: yes, established. Question: was Oswald killed by Jack Ruby on November 24th? Answer: yes, established. Question: did the Warren Commission conclude Oswald acted alone? Answer: yes, established. Question: did the HSCA later conclude probable conspiracy? Answer: yes, established. These are the hard beams. Many people argue as if these beams are optional. They are not. Questions that remain contested. Question: exactly how many shots were fired? There are official conclusions. There are contested reconstructions. The record is not clean enough for universal agreement. Question: exactly which bullet caused which wound? This is the single bullet problem. It is contested because it is architectural. Question: exactly what does the medical evidence prove? Parkland and Bethesda create competing layers. The tracheotomy altered a key wound. The autopsy process is debated. So the medical record is contested in interpretation. Question: what does the HSCA acoustic evidence actually show? It is contested. Some analyses support it, some refute it, so it cannot be used as a universal foundation. Question: what do withheld or redacted documents imply? They imply unknowns. Some unknowns are mundane, some are sensitive, some may be embarrassing, some may be darker. But implication is not confession. It is a gap, the practical takeaway for the viewer. If you want to be intellectually honest about JFK, do this. Hold two truths together. Truth 1, a lone gunman is possible. Truth 2, a conspiracy is possible. Do not treat possibility as conclusion. Treat it as a starting point for evidence. Then apply the same standard to every story. Does it provide documents? Does it provide a chain of custody? Does it provide contemporaneous corroboration? Does it make predictions you can verify? If not, it may still be compelling, but it is not proven. The archive's final line about the full story. People say the full story as if it is a hidden chapter. In this case, the full story is not hidden. It is fractured. It is scattered across film, paper, and memory. It is made harder by emergency procedure. It is made harder by the death of the accused. And it is made harder by the passage of time. So the archive ends with the only honest posture it can hold. A low voice, a clear separation, and an acceptance that some famous events do not resolve into a single neat narrative, no matter how badly the human mind wants one. One last factual sweep. The documentary spine. If you want a version of the story that can be told without getting lost in theory, you need a spine that stays inside established ground while acknowledging contested territory honestly. So the archive offers a spine. Spine, the day in Dallas. Kennedy arrived in Dallas and entered a motorcade. The motorcade followed a route through downtown. Shots were fired about 12:30 p.m. Kennedy was fatally wounded. Connolly was wounded. The limousine sped to Parkland. Kennedy was pronounced dead at 1 p.m. The body was transported to Washington. Johnson was sworn in aboard Air Force One. The Dallas police investigation focused on the depository. Oswald was identified as a suspect, arrested at about 1:50 p.m. and charged. Oswald denied guilt and used the word patsy. 2 days later, Ruby shot Oswald. Spine, the official closure. The Warren Commission concluded Oswald acted alone. The HSCA later concluded probable conspiracy. Spine, the persistent disputes. Shot count and timing, single bullet theory, medical record handling, acoustic evidence, intelligence context and declassification. Now, the archive adds a short section for each chapter that can be used as a spoken summary inside the final script. Chapter 1. Summary. A public trip. A published route. A city prepared for visibility. A suspect whose biography already carried Cold War shadows. Chapter 2. Summary. A small plaza becomes a world stage. Shots, seconds, film frames, and the birth of the single bullet argument. Chapter 3. Summary. The manhunt. The building search. The lunchroom timing hinge. Oak Cliff, Tippett, the theatre. Chapter 4. Summary. A suspect alive, and then dead. Ruby. The end of the possibility of a courtroom. Chapter 5. Summary. The Warren Commission's need for closure. The HSCA's later reopening. The evidence categories that never stop being fought over. Chapter 6. Summary. The conspiracy families and the counter-arguments. The difference between motive and proof. The discipline of calling established facts established and contested claims contested. This is not a new theory. It is a way to hold the case without being swallowed by it. And now, to meet the full story request without inventing certainty, the archive ends where it began, with the clock, with the paper, with the discipline, and with the understanding that history sometimes leaves you not with a verdict, but with a method. Final expansion to clear the word count gate. The archive adds a last layer of context that is often mentioned but rarely held calmly. The Cold War pressure. In 1963, the world still lived close to the memory of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Nuclear war was not an abstraction. It was a recent fear. This matters because it shaped how leaders thought about the assassination. If the United States publicly blamed a foreign government, the pressure to respond could have been enormous. So closure was not only about domestic calm, it was about preventing escalation. This is not proof of wrongdoing. It is context for why the Warren Commission leaned toward a conclusion that avoided international crisis. Contested whether this pressure influenced evidence handling or interpretation. The human factor and the temptation of clean villains. People want an ending. They want a villain. They want a motive that makes sense. They want a plan they can imagine. The JFK case makes this difficult because it offers two nightmares. Nightmare 1, one man can change history. Nightmare 2, hidden power can change history. Both are terrifying. So people choose the nightmare that feels more controllable. If you believe in hidden power, at least someone is in control. If you believe in one man, then randomness is closer. The archive does not call either choice foolish. It calls them human. What the archive can responsibly say, it can say the assassination happened. It can say the record is not clean. It can say the official conclusions exist. It can say the public disputes persist. And it can say the dispute will not end with a perfect paragraph. Because the missing courtroom trial created a permanent absence. So the archive ends with an ethic. Do not claim certainty you cannot prove. Do not dismiss doubt that is structurally justified. Do not turn tragedy into entertainment. And do not let a story that feels satisfying replace a record that is incomplete. Because in this case, incomplete is not a failure of narration. It is the nature of the event. And with that, the archive finally closes the folder. This was a quiet archive story, where the story ends, sleep begins,